Assalamu alaikum, brothers, sisters and friends. Welcome to a new episode of the GDM show, the Global Dawah Movement show. On today's show, we're here with Brother Sabur Ahmed. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
How are you?
Good.
Okay, good, excellent. So today's topic is Darwinian myths, right? So let's cover it. What we're going to look at today.
In the previous shows, as you know, we covered science as an inductive method, so all of its conclusions are revisable, and we gave some examples of that. And then about examples how the tree of life, the web of life, and other aspects of Darwinian evolution is inductive, and there's a lot of ikhtilaf, a lot of difference when it comes to evolutionary biologists on this particular topic.
Oh yes, I certainly remember the mess that you guys created there. Fact is, I did not tackle your previous video, as it was pretty much the same as the one before that, yet merely with a few extra added assertions that Stop Spamming covered, making any response from me rather redundant. It has also been noted by myself, as well as many of my subscribers, that Hamza now seems absent from the online video sphere since his most recent run-in with the secular community on YouTube, which of course ended in the whole Ashley Madison embarrassment. I haven't given up in trying to contact him, however, both over Facebook and Twitter, where he still publishes regularly about the lectures he is apparently still giving at universities. Yet, since he acknowledged that my video accepting his calling out of myself on the conditions that he defends himself at a neutral venue, he has fallen curiously silent. So until Hamza finally stops hiding from me, I guess I'll have to settle for Tweedledee and Tweedledum here.
Now today what we want to cover is something which again shows you the inductive nature of science, and again shows you what the biologist Henry Green, the senior editor of Nature, said about science. What he said is that all scientific conclusions are provisional. Right. Meaning they can change. But that's not what we get from Dawkins and Krauss and these other science popularizers.
Actually, it is. None of these people pretend that science is set in stone, as that is the very opposite of science. If that were the case, they would simply reject your claims on faith rather than strike you down with two simple words. Prove it. All currently available evidence is explainable through the evolutionary model. This is not the case with the Islamic model of theism, which fails to explain so very much about the biological world, and that's just innately. That's without even testing the scientific claims made in the Quran, which are wrong throughout all fields of science, including that the sun disappears into a muddy pool each night. This is even though the whole concept is ludicrous, considering that you could fit around 1,300,000 Earths into the sun. So not only must you deal with the fact that you must supply evidence to validate the claims of your scripture, but you must also account for the inconsistencies found between said text and reality.
So what we're going to be going through is, since 1975, there has been this fact which has been pumped all over the world. You will come across it in textbooks, maybe a documentary, museums, discussions, and all the time you'd hear about 99% similarity between humans and chimps.
Yes, yeah.
This has indeed become a popular statistic which is used in discussion. Yet, as always, there is some degree of discussion to be had on its accuracy. You see, when dealing with genetics, there are various ways in which a strand of DNA can change. Now, only one real aspect is being discussed in the whole 99% statistic, and that is substitution mutations. This is a mutation where one base mutates into a differing base through a copying error. To find these points, we lay out both sets of DNA and locate the comparable sequencing, i.e. the sequences that are directly alignable. This is made possible through the fact that substitution in mutation does not increase or decrease a code's length. But then there are other types of mutation to consider, i.e. insertion and deletion mutations, often referred to as indel mutations. Deletion is simply when a base or several bases drop from the DNA, leaving a gap and decreasing the code in length overall, whilst an insertion occurs where new DNA is introduced or old DNA is duplicated, increasing the code's length. With these taken into consideration, humans and chimps share 96% of their DNA, so it's a little more complicated than 99%, but that does not invalidate the claim or the utilization of said statistic so long as the methodology is kept consistent throughout the differing organisms.
Now, that sounds very, the first time you hear it, it's like, really? There's a 99% similarity between us and chimps? Because clearly there is a lot of difference between human beings and chimps.
Yeah,
they're climbing trees and we're going to space and discussing quantum mechanics. So
then again, when you think of evolution, that's one of the first things that comes to mind, because it's been popularized so much.
Yep.
We're similar to chimps. Our genetic makeup is almost exactly the same.
We're just the same. We're just a 1% difference, and so there's some serious problems here.
Well, yeah. You are discussing genetic differences in a percentage, alongside differences observable to the naked eye. Much of life shares a great deal of its proteins, which are, in a sense, the building blocks of organic life. So there is a broad-based similarity there with all organic life. The differences that account for our appearances are relatively small percentage-wise, as you note. When tackling creationists, they often fallaciously argue against the 96% statistic with the assertion that you are 50% your mother and 50% your father. In reality, your parents share at least 99.5% of their DNA already, being of the same species. So much of human diversity exists in this 0.5% difference, showing the power of genetics. And if that accounts for this wide variation, I do not think 4% accounting for the differences between us and chimpanzees is all too shocking.
Okay.
And just to give you a perspective on this, academics don't view this 99% similarity, which was found in 1975, and we're going to go over whether this is actually a fact in a minute, as a proof of common ancestry between us and chimps. And this is not something which they would take as something serious.
Okay.
So I'm just going to give you a quote from Elliot Sober. He's a philosopher of science, and in the Cambridge Evidence and Evolution, The Logic Behind Science, this is a book that they published, he says, however, if there was strong selection in each lineage for the traits that one observes, the expected degree of similarity would be about the same, regardless of whether the common ancestry or the separate ancestry hypothesis is true. Both of the following thoughts are therefore naive. Humans and chimps must share a common ancestor because they are so similar, and humans and mushrooms must have arisen independently because they are so different.
Right.
So this is page 296, 297.
Continue quote. Within a probabilistic framework, there is no must in either case, but in addition, the transition from degree of similarity to a claim about common ancestry versus separate ancestry in both examples must be mediated by information about the processes generating the traits in question. Comparing kinds of similarity. We have seen that sameness of character state always favours the common ancestry hypothesis over the separate ancestry hypothesis, if the assumptions described in section 4.4 hold. So in effect, he's acknowledging that yes, similarities do not innately suggest common ancestry, a fact that is perfectly fine considering that we didn't start off with genetics in the first place as evidence for evolution, yet we used it to compact the unquestionably one-sided conclusion that a mountain of evidence points towards. But let's go back to that page I was reading from. Do you see how he then goes on to discuss the theoretical ways of sorting out whether a common trait is indicative of a common ancestor? Vestigial traits, i.e. ones that appear to serve no purpose in one or both populations and are therefore not subject to the same environmental pressures. Think of whale leg bones, for example. They have no use whatsoever, displaying that, yes, these animals evolved from land vertebrates at one point in history. But when dealing with genetics, it's even simpler. You see, not all genes are active, as many are actually inactive and don't do anything at all. Humans and chimpanzees share these genes as much as they share active ones. Now, due to these genes playing zero role in anything, their existence, like the embryonic gills, points firmly at the common ancestry hypothesis and declares it the winner. So for you to pretend that the author is in some agreement with you is once again highly dishonest and only reflects the now expected standard of IERA and Mission Dawa, which is absolute academic bankruptcy. Well done on showing us nothing new.
This is a very important book on the logic behind the science, the logic behind the popular 99%. You know, people go around wearing those shirts, 99% chimp. These atheists wear these quite proudly, right? And what he's basically saying is,
no, what you are saying, he is saying. You cannot take the opening part of someone's discussion, in which they simply present both sides of the argument, prior them then taking us through what stands and what does not stand, as your evidence. This is the fallacy of false allegiance that allows someone to present a person on the side they do not agree with. That's why I simply play your clip rather than present your argument, as if I did it, then you could simply cut me out saying your own argument and say, see this atheist agrees with me, even though I was merely presenting your argument, so I could critique it. That is what you are doing here, and it is incredibly dishonest.
look, it doesn't prove that. I mean, why people think it proves that? I mean, we have according to the same method that was used in 1975 to show a 99% similarity between us and chimps. Well, there's a 50% similarity between us and bananas.
Yeah.
Does that mean that we're, genetically quite close to them?
You said cats were more closer.
I mean, cats are 90%, cows 80%. So if somebody was to take this seriously, then there would be some big issues, because according to the tree, which we've discussed in the previous shows, we're supposed to be quite close to the chimp.
Right.
So if we are very far from the bananas and very far from the cats and the cows, then why are we so close in terms of that 80, 90?
You can put it this way, that some of us came from cows, some from cats, and some from chimps. That's a possibility, looking at what we're talking about now.
You can make various sort of inferences, but really what's really quite interesting is academics don't view it as something really important.
And do tell me, which phantom academics would these be? So far you've quoted one person that does not agree with you at all, and simply asserted that there are others who, from what I have seen, I can only assume disagree with you as well. But going back to our similarity to other organisms, yes, that is exactly what we expect to see. We expect to see that the further back the common ancestor, i.e. the point where our ancestors and their ancestors departed from one another, the more significant the genetic difference due to mutation being continuous. That fits the evolutionary model beautifully, unlike the Islamic creation model. As for Hussein's rather asinine remarks about some people coming from cats and others from bananas, no. Every human being shares roughly the same genetic similarity to these other species. It's not that someone has 80% genetic relation to bananas and another only has 40%, so your ignorant piece of drivel spewed there is nothing but a gross mischaracterization of the evidence and the argument of evolution.
Now here's the big shocker. That experiment that was done in 1975 by King and Wilson, that was using an extremely small part of the DNA of the humans and the chimps and comparing them. A very small part. So this is something which was shown around the world as if it's a fact of science, it's an absolute fact, when what they actually did was they only took a very small part of the DNA of the humans and the chimps and they said, look, there's a 99% correlation. Since then, we have discovered so much about DNA that this 1% now is treated by evolutionary academics as a myth.
Okay, before you move on, just on that point.
Yeah.
See, that's a very interesting point now, because on a popular lay level, the majority of the people, the way they understand it, they have understood this, is, correct me if I'm wrong, is that, well, look, our genetic makeup as a whole, in general, is 99 to 98% similar to chimps.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is that it wasn't based on the entire
DNA.
it was based on a specific segment or part of it.
A very small part.
Right.
And since then, we've actually discovered that the 1% is a completely misrepresentation of the facts.
Right, so just as an analogy, sorry, I'm just trying to get this, because this is a very important point, right? It could be said, so would this analogy apply that someone can say you and me come from each other, we're the same because we have beards, and that's one part of us that's similar, whereas the rest of us is different?
I rather put it the way the academics have put it, because they put it in a much stronger term. I mean, this is what was written by, this is published in a science journal, and this is again a peer-reviewed science journal. We have these atheists who say, oh, you're using stuff that's not peer-reviewed, it's written by creationists. No, this is a science journal, you can go check it out for yourself.
We'll have the links in the
by the biologist John Cohen. And what he basically argues is that our DNA and chimp DNA is not 1% difference, and the title of his paper is actually Relative Differences, the Myth of 1%.
So these are the individuals that found the similarities, is it? Or
No. He quotes what the original paper and the scientists that have been speaking about it since. Now, I'm just going to give you some very interesting quotes from this actual paper, which, again, this is a public science journal. Anybody can go in there and access that information. You just have to log in, right? So, for many, many years, the 1% difference served us well because it was unappreciated how similar we were, says Pascal Gunerxt, a zoologist at UC San Diego. Now it's totally clear that's more of a hindrance for understanding than a help. Now here's how human and chimp DNA is actually different. And again, this is from the paper. Human and chimp genomes differ markedly in chunks of missing DNA, extra genes, number of chromosomes and chromosome structure, altered connections in gene networks, indels, gene copy number, co-expressed genes. Now this is again according to the same biologist Pascal Gunerxt. Any quantification of humanness versus chimpness is hindered by what I just mentioned. And what he actually says is, there isn't one single way to express the genetic distance between two complicated living organisms. So we don't know enough to make a comparison between two living organisms in the animal kingdom, let alone humans and chimps. And there's a huge difference when it comes to human beings and chimps in terms of all of the things that I just mentioned. And it's basically, according to him and other scientists, it's so difficult to even start the process of making a comparison between two, because it's like chalk and cheese.
Yeah.
Their chromosomes are different, the chunks of missing
Like you
DNA,
mentioned.
the extra genes, and there's so much difference between the two.
Well, I did indeed track down the 900-word lit review, which was published as a journal article. By the way, there is an open access one that you do not require a login to see that I will link down below. Pretty much the article discussed 3 different studies. The 1975 one Mission Dawa opened with, the 2005 one which clarified the 99 versus 96%, and a latter one from 2006 that suggests only 93.6% genetic similarity. Now, as the first study is redundant due to more thorough analysis of chimp and human genomes, we'll discard that. I traced back the third study, and sure enough the research team did find an approximate 6.4% difference between humans and chimps existed. The difference in this study to the 2005 study is probably the result of numerous factors. For starters, a portion of it could have been the result of differing chimp and human genomes. Remember what I noted earlier, i.e. that in humans alone there is a 0.5% difference between individuals typically, and then of course we have to acknowledge that chimps also have genetic diversity among and between populations. On top of this, there is the issue of differing methodology in a field that is noted to be difficult. But what the 2006 study still displayed through its own methodology across mammalian species is that the further back the predicted common ancestor given to us via fossil taxonomy, the greater the differences in genetics. That's internal comparison. So, to quote one-liners out of context and stress specific words that are not stressed in the original text is again highlighting IERA's dishonest methodology. They note something is difficult, and yes, one person states that they doubt it'd be easy to come up with a statistic which is smack bang on the money, but that does not then mean it is impossible to get a relative or general sense. That is why relative is in the title, because no matter the way you cut things, so long as the same methodology is applied throughout the studies, they find the same pattern, i.e. the further back the predicted common ancestor, the greater the differences in genetics between the tips of the branches on the tree of life. You have to accept that fact and get over it.
What you're saying is that essentially we're more different in ways than we are similar.
Well, no, not me, and this is according to the paper.
Okay.
Our differences are so big,
Yeah.
we cannot,
There's no way of telling.
we can't actually quantify that at the moment.
Okay.
That's not the case at all. The difference is in no way affected negatively by the size. If anything, the larger the size, the better the comparison due to reducing anomalies. But the issue is in the devising of an equation to compare the two, i.e., do we keep or remove indel mutations or not? There is no standardized methodology, meaning combining the current studies would be flawed until there is a standardized methodology to compare between studies.
Now, this is actually the way the paper actually ends, and I'm quoting word by word what it says here. Could researchers combine all of what's known and come up with a precise percentage difference between humans and chimpanzees? I don't think there's any way to calculate a number, says geneticist Savi Pabo, a chimp consortium member at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany. In the end, it's a political and social and cultural thing about how we see our differences.
That sums up. That just sums everything up, right? I guess at the end.
Well, a precise number is impossible when both demographics have variety in themselves. that does not mean we cannot come up with a percentage with a range, i.e. plus or minus, like so many other aspects of science. As we gain better understanding, we may be able to reduce that range, but what will not happen is that chimps shoot down to 2% genetic similarity and bananas up to 78% genetic similarity. We have most of the picture. We have a general pattern which can be observed, and all we are doing now is focusing that image through the application of modern science, which acts as our lens to get a more accurate picture. It's not chaos, it's simply tidying up.
What's really interesting is this 99% chimp myth is still being used.
Yeah.
It's still taught in some textbooks. And what's really shocking is this thing has gone all over the world. And now it's going to be very difficult to actually reverse that process and go around telling everyone, actually, that 1% thing was a myth.
Yeah.
And we can't compare the two because it's like chalk and cheese. They're so different.
Yeah.
And it's really shocking that
Because it's left the realms of science and it's gone in other places.
It's gone into the popular media, but anybody that is involved in evolutionary biology and has access to these journals, they'll be able to look up these references and actually see there's a huge difference between humans and chimps. And anybody could have told, I mean, even if you were alive in 1975 when they were going around saying, this is a fact, 99% difference between similarities between humans and chimps, your basic common sense would have told you these chimps are jumping around in trees and human beings are going to space, discussing quantum mechanics, solving mathematical equations. There's a clear difference between the two. And they were right if they were to use their common sense at the moment. And now what's really sad is a lot of people are misinformed.
Yeah.
And this is due to what we've been saying for a very long time. When you speak about scientific truths, scientific conclusions, you need to understand science can go through radical paradigm shifts because of the problem of induction, problem of empiricism, and that one set of data, you come to a best conclusion, best inference based upon that, but there are other inferences possible.
Yeah.
And also, new data can come which can totally change your picture, like what's happened with this 99% myth.
Yeah, I think that sums it up really well, and that's just one of several myths that we will be covering in the upcoming shows in the next couple of weeks. We've got an evolution series as a playlist, so you can go through that and watch the previous videos that we mentioned earlier. Also, there's an amazing event coming this December, which is called Failed Hypotheses, right? And the link for that, to register to that event, will be in the description box, and at that event we'll be covering this topic in much more detail, revisiting Darwinism and just seeing exactly what's going on, basically what has been going on for several years. But more on that next week. For now, Jazakallah khair for watching, and stay tuned for the next show. Assalamu alaikum.
What a load of utter rubbish. If this is an example of the quality of that event, then I feel sorry for anyone foolish enough to sign up. All you have done is mischaracterize all of the evidence available in the exact same fashion that Hamza did when discussing the psychology of belief and the fitra. You cite sources that contradict your claims, and yet you sit there happily in the knowledge that your average viewer will not have access to the books you mention or the journal articles you source, and will not be bothered to try and check them. Again, that's why I am here. That's why I continue to call out IERA and all of its splinter groups for their dishonest tactics, which have been called out time and time again, and just as often IERA has turned around and displayed that they will not change their arguments to include reality. It's all a big lie tied to said organization and needs to be pressed over this. So please, to support this action, share this video, but more importantly, share it particularly with your Muslim friends or local Islamic society, so that they know what I-error is and what I-error is not. With that, I'd like to say thank you.